Christmas is my favorite holiday and my favorite time of year. I love the music, I love the lights, I love the laughter, but the thing which I love the most is that millions of people from around the world, for perhaps the only time throughout the year, think just a little bit about Jesus, and that is a very good thing. But despite the nativity scenes that are found downtown, in neighborhoods, and in churches, perhaps the most important aspect of the Christ story is often forgotten, that God, through Jesus Christ, became one of us. This is what Matthew's account of Christ's birth says. This is how the birth of Jesus the Messiah came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Matthew tells us that Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, and under Jewish custom, this had the effect of being legally married already. They simply had not consummated the marriage. And it says that Mary came to be with child, came to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Now, if you can, just imagine coming home and telling your parents, "Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant, but don't worry, it's through the Holy Spirit." This must have been challenging for Mary to tell Joseph. And in fact, the penalty under Jewish law for committing adultery, for being unfaithful to one's spouse, was death by stoning, though under Roman law, this was not often enforced. But Joseph was a righteous man, and apparently a compassionate one. And so he decided that he would simply divorce her quietly. But an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and said to him, "Joseph, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because she is conceived through the Holy Spirit. And she will be with child, and you shall name the child Jesus, for he will save the people from their sins." And all this took place to fulfill what was found in the prophet Isaiah, that the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Incredibly, God came down from heaven and took the form of a baby, in which he would experience hot and cold, laughter and joy, pain and suffering, all the range of human experience. And this is good news. Sometimes we may not be too sure about God, we may not be too sure about Christians, but Jesus is someone that most people seem to like. After all, it's hard not to like someone who went around talking about love, joy, peace, and forgiveness, who healed the sick, fed the hungry, and set the captive free. And the good news is, this same Jesus is God Himself. And so if we want our clearest picture of who God is, all we have to do is look at the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. Now, we don't know the exact time or place that Jesus was born, but in Bethlehem, there's a church called the Church of the Nativity, which seeks to commemorate Christ's birth. And interestingly enough, this church is built over a cave, and ancient writers such as Justin Martyr spoke of the birth of Jesus Christ being in a cave, and that wise men from the east, from Arabia, came and gave gifts to the Christ child. But now, back to the Christ story. Matthew continues on and says this: After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, Matthew's account of Christ's birth contains this fascinating story of wise men from the east who follow a star and come and bow down and give gifts to Christ the King. And so the question becomes, who were these wise men? Well, since they were from the east, some have thought that they were Persian or Indian or Arabian or even Chinese. But the point is that Christ's birth was like a shot that rang out around the world, drawing together people from all backgrounds and all races. Rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all peoples would come together and worship the Christ child, the King that had come into the world. And the gifts that the wise men would bring would be kingly gifts. Gold, which was a type of rich monetary gift. Myrrh, which was a sweet-smelling fragrance. and frankincense, which was an interesting kind of gift because one of the uses of frankincense was its use in the embalming process. And so it may be that in the giving of this gift, there was a foreshadowing of the type of king that Jesus would be, a king who would give up his life and die on behalf of his people. But we see in the original Christ story that the giving of gifts was not for oneself, but for Christ the King. So how do we give gifts to Christ? Well, Jesus would grow up and would later say that whenever we give in His name to the least of these, to those that the world may have forgotten, the sick, the hungry, the homeless, the lonely, the forgotten, whenever we give to one of these, that we have done it for Him. And like the wise men, we can give these same types of gifts today. Rich monetary gifts, the fragrance of our worship offered up to God, and service and sacrifice, taking on the bitterness of the world and of the cross, and serving God and others. Because God through Christ became human, we learn both what God is really like, as well as the kind of life that God intends for us to live. So how about you? What do you think of a God who would become human? What gifts can you offer up to God? And what have you learned about God through the birth of Jesus Christ?